What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of Top 10 Video Game Characters I Like That Others Hate. Now, for those that are wondering where part 1 is, that is up on my channel now, so I suggest you watch that video first to see numbers 10 through 6, then come back to this video for the remaining 5. Alright, that being said, let's get back into it. Moving on, next at number 5, we have Count Bleck from Super Paper Mario. Naturally, when it comes to the Mario franchise, we have to take a look at the RPG series. And naturally, that just leads us into the Paper Mario series as a whole, which has gotten a lot of interesting talk about their characters. And considering how I've played through 5 Paper Mario games, this leads us into the remaining game I have left, Super Paper Mario, and the character that's the number 5 entry, Count Bleck. And I'm actually surprised that a lot of people hate this guy, because to me, he's kind of an interesting character, not only due to being fairly intimidating like a standard phantom thief, but his entire nihilistic view and his use of wanting to activate the Chaos Heart in order to create a void to destroy the dimensions really says a lot. It is a very interesting thing. And not only that, it really says a lot once you consider most of this is courtesy of a broken heart from his past, since before he was Count Bleck, he was Blumiere, a young man who's, of course, in love with a young woman by the name of Lady Timpani. Of course, their relationship was basically opposed by his father, who eventually ended up banishing Timpani to another dimension and leaving her for dead. Thus leading to him getting a broken heart and utilizing the Dark Prognosticus to destroy his own home dimension. Yeah. And even though we followed up the sympathetic villain angle with King Ollie and Paper Mario the Origami King, honestly, Count Bleck definitely proves to be one of the best sympathetic villains the Paper Mario franchise ever had. And if we have a new entry, I hope we get the same thing as a villain in that game. Here's hoping. Moving on, next at number 4, we have the playable cast of Fire Emblem Fates. Alright, you already know what I'm gonna say. I love Fire Emblem Fates. In fact, Fire Emblem Fates is the only game in the franchise that I've played the most of, second only to Fire Emblem Three Houses. And even before this entire list, and the Reddit videos leading up to these lists, honestly, I've seen a lot of people mentioning about their hate for dislike of many of the characters of Fire Emblem Fates. And while some are honestly understandable, in fairness, I always have to find some way. Due to Fire Emblem Fates being my favorite game, I have to find some way to at least defend them at some point. And honestly, this basically leads me to finding some good points about many of the characters in Fire Emblem Fates. Of course, I'm not gonna go too far into these characters because I want to save them for eventual lists. But when it comes down to it, some of the characters that I really enjoy are both of the royal families of Hoshino and Nor, due to their entire personalities. Just besides caring about Corrin, many of them are just individuals with complicated personalities that I truly enjoy. The retainers like Hinata, Niles, and Perry, despite their kooky personalities, have some interesting efforts that make them very solid retainers to each of their respective royals. And the child units, which, while they were following up on Fire Emblem Awakening's child unit success, since they came back to the past from a bad future, while the baby realms are kind of odd, many of the second generation kids from Fire Emblem Fates basically have enough personality and character that they would fit in the game even without some efforts of the baby realm aspect. Just have them come back to the past from the future and it'll be just fine. Just simple answer there. And either way, I'm gonna be more or less going to bat for these guys no matter what. You can count on that. Moving on next at number 3, we have Cid from the Final Fantasy franchise. Alright, considering I took it when I was basically asked this of the for those from the Final Fantasy Reddit about their least favorite Final Fantasy characters, it's kind of obvious that many of them would essentially mention about the cast of Final Fantasy XIII, and this, aka the hallway simulator, for obvious reasons. However, one surprising comment came courtesy of a Reddit user, whose name I am blanking on at this point, who basically mentions that she more or less dislikes Cid Highwind from Final Fantasy VII. And this caused me to raise an eyebrow in response. And namely because, well, it's just one Cid out of many. Considering how Cid's been a constant presence in the Final Fantasy franchise, he's such a varied individual that part of my brain just went, if you hate one Cid, you more or less hate all of them. Which, there's a good chance it's possibly not the case. But even with that, I really like all the Cids. From the goofy, happy-go-lucky mechanic from Final Fantasy IV, to the inventor of the Magitech armor and the adopted grandfather of Celis Share in Final Fantasy VI, to the badass soldier that is Cid Highwind of Final Fantasy VII and Kingdom Hearts, to the headmaster of Balam Garden in Final Fantasy VIII, to the leader of the Owlbed and Yuna's uncle in Final Fantasy X, to a gas station owner who takes care of Noctis's car in Final Fantasy XV, and the badass soldier from Final Fantasy XVI who passes his title on to Clive Rossfield. Honestly, depending on what happens, there is a good chance that even if a person does hate Cid as a whole, there's possibly one Cid that you possibly hate a little less than all the others. Because of the versatility. And to a point possibly even liking. Really depends. Moving on next at number 2, we have Hop from Pokemon Sword and Shield. Oh boy! Honestly, kinda knew this was coming, And considering recent ones with the Pokemon fandom and the modern Pokemon entries, yeah, there's a good chance that the Pokemon fandom has been split on specific things. Especially when it comes to the rivals, as many fans of and many Pokemon fans tend to like the more jerk rivals of the earlier games like Blue and Silver over the more friendlier rivals like Hal, Nimona, Bianca, Sharon, and the X and Y friend group. However, when it comes down to it, Hop is one of the more interesting characters who I think deserves a lot of his, well, props when you think about it. Since while he is basically your childhood friend at the beginning of the game and your next door neighbor, he's basically your standard rival since he wants to be a great trainer like his older brother Leon. And in fact, it was his idea to want to get into the Galar Gym Challenge. And as such, well, yeah, it basically starts off with him being your standard rival. Of course, after your third gym badge and after he loses a battle to Bede, it leads him to go into a crisis of identity where he more or less decides to switch up his team just to find his own identity and who he is as a trainer because he feels like he's not living up to his brother's legacy. Even getting rid of his Wooloo, of his trusty Wooloo. Oh boy. Honestly, even with that, eventually in Searchester, he discovers that, hey, while he's not as strong as Leon, all he has to do is just battle his own way. And by then, he's able to give you quite the challenge in the later half of the game. And even in the post game, after you defeat him, he decides to just follow a dream of becoming a researcher, and decides to become Sonia's assistant. And after her previous assistant betrayed her. And honestly, it's nice to see that sort of growth in a character. And it's really refreshing as well. Here's hoping Gen 10 does so as in the rival does well in the rival department as well. Here's hoping. Finally, at number 1, we have Joel Miller from The Last of Us. Yeah, I know it's been a long time since The Last of Us was originally released, but honestly, when it comes down to it, I was more or less around for people basically hating on Joel because after giving up Ellie to the Fireflies in order for them to find a cure for the zombification outbreak, he basically decides to go back on it and take back Ellie while killing the doctors who were on call to essentially create the zombie outbreak cure. But honestly, at this point, I understand how he was feeling since they basically didn't see eye to eye with each other. But as time went on, they grew a bond to the point that he saw her as a surrogate daughter. And since he lost his actual daughter at the beginning of the game, he didn't want to lose another surrogate. He didn't want to lose another one. So he did all he could to save her. And plus, we don't know if that serum would have worked. Especially as the game theorists pointed out. So, yeah. It was basically a hit or miss. And even though he ended up getting killed by Abby, and seriously, I do not condone death threats to anyone, I'm saying this now. It's fair to say that in Last of Us Part 2, he really shouldn't have gotten all that he got because of that. Just saying. Just really saying here. Those are the top 10 video game characters I like that others hate. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.